Hello and welcome to The Writing Retreat, a cozy and casual podcast that is designed to serve as a virtual writing getaway for writers everywhere. I'm your host, speculative fiction writer Lynn Jung, and I am so happy to welcome you back into this space. Please dust off your whip, grab your hot drink of choice, and join me for a little while. Alright, so we are back for episode 3. This one is going to be coming out a little bit later than usual just because I had a vlog that I wanted to get out prior to this. I am still figuring out my upload schedule, so please bear with me. I feel like I've just had so many content series ideas and I need to sort of make them work with my current weekly upload schedule. So, before we dive into today's topic, let's get into a little bit of what I've been reading and writing lately. I've been working my way through a couple of books. None have really gripped me, so I want to talk about a book that I finished reading a couple weeks ago, and I read this book very quickly, like in the span of a few days, and this was CHLORINE, the Story of a Mermaid by Jade. Honestly, I came out of this book not knowing how to feel about it. I wasn't sure if I enjoyed it. I knew kind of like in my heart that it was objectively really well done. The visceral nature of the writing and this girl's story and how just absolutely insane the main character is, and the ambiguity that brings into the narration because she's quite literally the epitome of the unreliable narrator, which is a tool that I love. And then I thought about it a little bit more and I was like, is CHLORINE dark academia at its finest? So this is actually the story of a teenage girl. It sort of follows her journey throughout like childhood, but it mainly focuses on the period of time where she's in high school, and she's a competitive swimmer and she's very, very good. She also has this fixation on mermaids and she wants to become one. So it's her journey as she starts to sort of break down from the pressures of the competitive swimming world and also like going through puberty in a really intense way. And there are a lot of themes that definitely harken back to like body dysmorphia. I know the author themselves is non-binary, and it's just so interesting. It's so gory in a way that is kind of not the typical kind of gore. It's very much like teenage girl body gore, if that makes sense, like going through puberty as someone who is born with a uterus. It is natural. It is something that people just go through. It's very, very natural, but it's also very gross a lot of the times. So it's that kind of body horror almost. And then you get to the part where she becomes a mermaid because it's the story of a mermaid. And that part is like, I don't get squicked out easily. Like I've literally assisted on surgeries many times, but it got to me. It just really got to me. So it was very well done. Like it evoked every emotion it wanted to evoke from the reader. It just was not the kind of story that I personally enjoy reading, but also at the same time, I kind of loved it. So I like that. I like coming away from a story or a book or anything being like, I don't know how I felt about that, and I need to think about it. And I'm still thinking about it. I feel like a lot of the books I've been reading these days, I've just been like, one and done. You know, I read it, it was all right, or it was very bad, it's over now. And I don't tend to dwell on the themes or the characters or the events of the story that much. But this is definitely one that stuck with me. It's also very much adult literary horror. I think if you're going into this expecting like a mermaid story or a fairy tale or anything like that, you are not getting that. It's a horror story with the mermaid stuff as sort of a framework. So definitely if you're interested, I would look up content warnings first and then maybe read an excerpt and then give it a shot, because I hesitate to recommend this because I didn't know how to feel about it. It has somewhere like a 3.6 on Goodreads, so obviously it was quite controversial with readers, so I would just make sure that it's the type of thing you're interested in reading. But I really enjoyed it. It was very gross. I loved it. Okay, now for what I've been writing. If you caught last week's vlog, I officially finished Act 2 of Moths. I'm going right ahead into Act 3. It is like the day after I finished filming that vlog, so I'm probably going to pick up the laptop and go back into writing right after this. So that is what I've been reading and writing. And now let's get into some news. I've mentioned this in my last couple of videos, but my sophomore short story publication, Eulogy for a Muse, which is a flash fiction piece about the intersection between art and grief told through the narrative of one of the 9 muses who has just been banished from her home on Mount Parnassus and now has to navigate the mortal world. It's a very, very short piece. It's a little bit more abstract than, Esther Park or anything I've written previously. This came out with the Icarus Writing Collective, which is a Greek mythology themed literary magazine. It is free to read online, the entire issue is. It's their second issue as well, so my sophomore story and their second issue. which is titled The Moon. I did struggle to find a space for this one, so I'm super happy that it found a home, and the entire issue is definitely worth a read, so I'll link that below. Second piece of news is that I am cutting the sprint segment from this podcast. That probably means the solo podcast episodes that I do that are just me talking and not a guest will be a lot shorter. I just found that it sort of interrupted the flow of the podcast, and then when I was thinking about it, if I'm doing an audio only version of this, like if I upload this podcast to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then there's just going to be this like gap of silence for 10 or 15 minutes in the middle, so I won't be doing the sprints anymore. Sorry to anyone who enjoyed them. I did see that most people skipped over it, which is totally fine. Now that all of the housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into today's topic. If you hadn't noticed from the title already, we're going to be talking about aphantasia, which I've mentioned a couple times. It's something that I just became recently aware of in myself. Like I just sort of realized I might have this, but I wanted to talk about it specifically because I saw some mean tweets about John Green. I'm actually off Twitter and I have been for a pretty long time, but these trickled down to me. So here was his initial tweet. It's baffling to me that some of y'all see stuff in your mind. You see it the way your eyes see. I always thought visualize meant thinking of the words/ideas/feelings associated with the thing, not actual visuals. I am such a total 5 on this scale. I didn't know 1 to 4 existed. And this scale that he included in the tweet is basically a picture of 5 white heads, and then number 1 is a very realistic picture of an apple inside the head. Number 2 is a more simplistic one. Number 3 is a black and white apple. Number 4 is the sketch outline of an apple, and number 5 is completely blank. And what he's describing here is aphantasia. If you are a 5 on the scale, if you cannot picture an apple, you can't rotate it in your mind, there's just no actual visual in your head when you think a thought, then you're a 5. I do think that this little chart here is kind of simplistic. What I'm getting to here is that people were like blasting him. I don't know what the general sentiment is toward John Green at this point. He does get like a little bit of flack for writing sort of like corny young adult books back when The Fault in Our Stars and all that was coming out. But people were saying like, oh, this is the reason you can't write. And that sort of bothered me because I also have a 5. Like, I do not see the apple. And I never in my life thought I'd be defending John Green. You know what's also wild is like Alex Astor also made a TikTok that was about her not being able to visualize as well, and people were coming at her. So I'm now officially defending Alex Astor as well. Having aphantasia doesn't mean you can't write, and doesn't mean you can't write description, and I'm going to get into why that is and talk a little bit about my experience with aphantasia in a little bit. So I do understand that if you're used to thinking in a certain way, like everyone's brain works differently, but if you're used to seeing pictures in your head when you think, it might feel like people who don't see a picture in their head don't have thoughts at all. Same with people who have an inner monologue. If you don't have an inner monologue, then are you even thinking? Like, how do your thoughts manifest? Because it is very, very difficult to describe and to sort of like understand, or visualize isn't the right word, but conceptualize how other people's thoughts look and manifest and feel. Because we really do only understand what's going on in our own head. It's like that thing where you don't really know if the pink you see is the same as the pink that everyone else sees. Because how do you describe a color where really the only possible description you have for it is that it is pink, or like it's the color of a flamingo, which is, you know, someone might be seeing that flamingo as neon green and just associate the word pink with it. It's one of those things where we'll never really know what's going on in other people's heads because we cannot transfer consciousness, we cannot crack into people like that. So let's just have that be point 1. Like, you don't really understand how other people's thoughts work. I don't understand what it's like to visualize your thoughts. To me, that's kind of crazy and weird. Just like John Green said. It is kind of bizarre for me to think that people can close their eyes and basically have a movie play through their heads. Wild. But let's backtrack a little bit. What does visualization mean when it comes to thoughts? If you think you might have aphantasia, the thing that was more useful to me than the apple chart was visualize a table. Visualize a bowl on that table. What color is the bowl? Where is it sitting on the table? What kind of table is it? For me, it's almost like I can visualize the abstraction of a bowl on a table. Like, I have the concept of a table, I have a concept of a bowl. I understand that there's a bowl sitting on the table because that's something I've seen in real life. So I've seen it with my eyes, so I have an idea of what it looks like, but I'm not seeing it in my head because I cannot tell you what color the bowl is. I cannot tell you where it's sitting on the table. I cannot tell you what color the table is, how many legs it has. There's just none of that like detail is in there because I'm not holding a picture in my mind. I'm just holding the concept of a bowl and a table. I hope that makes sense. I don't know how to describe it because I cannot describe my thoughts. My thoughts are just my thoughts. Also, for the record, I don't think this is a full-on disorder or anything. Like, how would you diagnose this? It's not in the DSM. I don't think it's a disorder. I think people just have different methods of thought, and that is totally okay. Like, it doesn't make me dumb. You know, it doesn't mean that you're less intelligent, less creative, less capable, as we're going to get into. It just means that you manifest your thoughts differently. That's it. We're just all different. Also, one thing I do want to mention that I think is specific to me, and I'm curious if anyone else who thinks they might have aphantasia has this. It's almost like I can visualize movement. I'm a very kinetic learner, so I have to do things to learn them a lot of the time. Like if you explain a card game to me, I won't understand. But if I get to play the card game, then I'll understand it a lot better and I'll pick it up pretty quickly. So for me, I can see movement. Like if I'm trying to picture two people dancing, I can almost see the way they move, see the way like the skirt flows, see their steps and all that. However, if you ask me what color anyone's hair is, what they look like, what they're wearing, other than like the generic movement of a skirt, I don't know. There's nothing there. Another thing I want to mention is I do have an ADHD diagnosis, and there has been suggestions that there's like a link between aphantasia and autism spectrum disorder and like ADHD and other your brain's little different things. That link I think has since been disproven. I would have to double check that. I didn't really read up on the research papers because who's researching this? But I just wanted to mention that I do think that maybe be careful. It just feels a little ableist sometimes, which again, I know I said that this isn't like a disorder or deficiency, but it just feels unnecessarily rude to associate aphantasia with not being creative or not being like intelligent, and also coming at writers with aphantasia for not being able to write because of that. That's not why Alex Astor can't write. She can't write for other reasons. I'm pretty sure it's not aphantasia. But at the same time, because our brains work differently, because our thought processes are different, like everyone else, if you're a writer with aphantasia, you're going to have specific weaknesses in your writing, and I think there's a correlation between what weaknesses writers with aphantasia have and having aphantasia, if that makes sense. Like the way you think is going to affect how you write. It doesn't mean you can't write, but there's going to be some specific weaknesses you might run into with aphantasia versus a writer who might have a different set of weaknesses because they don't have aphantasia. Again, I cannot reiterate how much I cannot believe I am defending John Green and Alex Astor right now, but this is also for all of my other, writers who might not be able to visualize their thoughts, because you know what? It is hurtful to see comments like that when I know full well that I cannot see things the way that some other people might be able to. Anyway, the second part of the John Green aphantasia gate is that he had a really good response to someone that I dug up because I was like looking into this. Also, Twitter doesn't let you see tweets anymore if you don't have an account, which is complete BS because I want to like see what's going on sometimes, but I don't know, maybe it's for the best. Anyway, John Green had this point, which I really liked. Yeah, for me, everything has always been made out of language, so language is a natural fit. I feel like if I could picture things with my mind, I'd want to make visual art or movies or video games or something. Which is he's so real for that one. So, little known fact, I was an art minor for a while. Art was a really big part of my life, like visual arts. From like middle school up until the first couple years of college. I draw, I paint, and it's not that I was bad, I just couldn't do a lot of stuff without a reference in front of me. And it's because I couldn't visualize things in the same way, and I never realized that was my issue. I think I had like a conversation with my friend who is a working artist at one point, and she was like, that's so weird that you can't see with your mind, because that is a big boon to her as a visual artist. I also for a moment fancied myself going into like stage plays and film and television, like screenwriting and script writing basically. I've done a couple of like small, essentially skits, but stage productions that have been put on. And outside of the dialogue, it was really hard for me to figure out blocking, figure out staging, just that aspect was difficult for me. And that's why I ended up writing books and short stories, because I don't need to be able to see for those things. Because, and here is my maybe controversial take on this, writing is not just about description. It is about describing emotion, describing abstract concepts that aren't necessarily seen. It's about metaphorical language. It's about dialogue and relationships. Like, you are not just writing an endless description of a flower field or someone's eyes. That is not to say that descriptive writing is not a big part of writing. It's not to say that description isn't an essential part of writing, but it's not the only part of writing. And you can write description based off of references, just like some people can draw based off of references. You don't need to be able to see it in your mind. Implying that you're a bad writer if you're not able to pull an image from your mind and write a perfect, down to the last detailed description of it is odd to me, because really I feel like that's just one area that you can improve on, even if you can't pull that image directly from your mind. Again, you can use references. You can draw inspiration from all over the place. And also, let's remember that visually impaired people can write as well. So it's not just people who can't see in their mind's eye, it's people who can't see with their real eyes. Also, I agree with John Green. I think language and flow are going to be more important for, narrative fiction especially, but all sorts of writing. And dialogue plays into that as well. And I think that some people who maybe prioritize the visuals in their head might not be able to hit that flow as neatly or as cleanly. Like, if you think with an inner monologue, if you think with words first, that could even be an advantage with writing. Not saying that it necessarily is, but that is probably more useful than just seeing a picture in your brain, because then you have to translate that picture into words versus just having it in your head ready to go. Now, that is not to say that having aphantasia automatically makes you like a perfect writer or just have no issues with writing. There are issues with my writing in terms of like lacking description sometimes. It's just not a priority for me a lot of the times, because that's just not how my brain works. I don't go into things with the visual in my head. So yes, I do suffer from white room syndrome in my first drafts very often. Sometimes I do forget to describe what a character looks like, or I fall back on familiar language. That's something that has been difficult for me is, I don't know, I always am so on top of it when it comes to describing or showing a character's personality. But when I'm describing what they look like, I'll be like, he was a tall man with brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin. And like, that's it. So I have to really dig deep to find interesting ways to describe what people look like. Also, one thing that I've noticed recently that I find kind of interesting is that because I can sort of see movement in my mind, I tend to over-describe movement, not just in the tracking way. Tracking for me, I don't know if this is a term I came up with or something I read somewhere. Tracking is when you're describing every minute movement that a character makes, like, oh, he rested his hand on the table, he grabbed my fingers, he smiled, his cheek twitched, like every movement gets described. I do that a lot in first drafts and it's very annoying. Not just that, but also just character descriptions come in the form of their tics, their twitches, how much they smile, how much they laugh, their hand gestures. So I might end up describing the way they move more than the way they look, which might be okay sometimes. I think now that I'm aware of that, I can just look for it in editing and kind of find a balance between the two. But yes, the bad one for me is definitely white room syndrome, character descriptions. Yeah, weirdly enough, I can get really, really into the minutiae of descriptions of nature, specifically smaller things in nature, like if someone's looking at a flower or a tree or an animal. That's definitely because of my educational background. I got used to describing what I was seeing out in the field during my field courses and field work. So I'd say if you're a writer with aphantasia, you might struggle with something similar when it comes to your descriptions. I will say that I have noticed, I haven't read a John Green book in a very long time, but I did notice that in Alex Astor's book, Light Lark, which I read in a vlog and then tried to rewrite relatively recently. But honestly, I think the white room syndrome and not really understanding what characters looked like, I think those things came from a lack in her world building, which has nothing to do with aphantasia. Her world building just wasn't very well thought out. Now, how does this play into inner monologue? Inner monologue is when people have basically a little voice in their head that narrates what they do. It might talk to them. It's just their thoughts manifested as a voice. And not everyone has this inner monologue. This is just another way in which people's thoughts can differ. I personally do not have an inner monologue in my day-to-day activities. This is probably why I make dumbass decisions, because I don't think very much. I I don't rationalize very well when I'm out and about in the real world. However, when I sit down to write, that inner voice does come up for me. It's not super clear, like it's not like I'm hearing someone actually talking in my ear, but as I'm typing, the words that are about to come up appear in my head as a voice, so I'm just typing what I hear in my head. And that's basically how my thoughts manifest. As I'm writing, I hear a little voice. I think this is why my dialogue and my flow are good, because I'm hearing it. I tend to focus a lot on that flow, on how it sounds. So in my opinion, one of the qualities that I like the most about my writing, about my voice and style, is that it sings. It's very rhythmic. It would translate well into audio. It has like a beat to it almost. And I really like that about my writing. So in other words, yes, you can write, and you can write well with aphantasia. I think really it's just a matter of watching out for descriptions. But again, writing isn't all just descriptive writing. Like there's so much more to it. And if you have aphantasia, you might be better at the flow, at dialogue, at describing those abstract concepts like emotions or philosophy. There's just so much more to writing than description, so it kind of got under my skin that so many people were quick to jump on John Green for not being able to see things in his head. Like, yes, maybe potentially I say this without having read his writing, so it might be the case that he needs to beef up his descriptive writing a little bit more, but that's so easy. Like, it's not really the end of the world. That is the end of today's topic, so let's go into the Dear Lynn segment of this video. I am still pulling from the original pool of 27 submissions that I got prior to me releasing the first episode. We're just gonna do this, I guess, moving forward. I'll open up another pool soon when I hit the end of this, which I think will be a couple episodes from now. This first one is from Como. Their woe is finding creative ways to deliver exposition on a magic power system. I am currently working on an outline, I don't want to say script, but an outline for my final fantasy world building video, which is going to be about magic systems. And this is one of the areas that I've gotten stuck on. So I'll try to be brief, but I'll touch on different ways I've managed to implement my magic system into the actual narrative of the story. I also made a short video for NaNoWriMo this year that describes different ways to implement or include your world building in the actual text of your story as well, so that might be helpful. My main tip for this one is going to be have your characters encounter problems. I think a great way to show what magic can and cannot do is early on have moments where characters solve a problem with magic, and then have one where they aren't able to solve a problem with magic, and have that sort of be like your bracket of what magic is capable of. This is a very simplistic way of explaining it, and if you have a really complex, sprawling magic system with a lot of different branches, this could be difficult to do. But the best way to explain magic in your world is to have it be put to use, like right away. And you can cheat a little bit as a character is using magic for the first time in your narrative. You can talk a little bit through their inner monologue what the magic is capable of doing, how it works. Just a little bit, you don't want to go overboard. I have a scene like this in the first chapter of Moths where Lark, the main character, uses magic to break a lock. And so she kind of runs through the process in her head. She's like thinking it through, so you get to see a little bit of how the magic functions. And I will talk a little bit more about the hard magic system in Moths in my fantasy world building video, which I hope I'll be able to put out relatively soon. But yes, basically have magic solve a problem and have magic hit a wall. I think there's a lot of ways you can go about that, and there's a lot of different creative methods you can use to show that. But it's definitely a big improvement over just straight up info dumping everything. Number 20 is from Cass. I've been writing for nearly 10 years now. I've been getting better at the technical side of writing, pacing, showing versus telling, description, etc. But sometimes it feels like the more I work on that, the more I lose what made writing fun. I want to tell the story as best as I can, but sometimes I just want to tell the story. This is really interesting to me because honestly the technical side of writing has made it more fun for me. I love learning more about writing. I love improving my craft in all sorts of ways. But if this is how you're feeling, then I think you can let go a little bit. I do understand that like once you're starting to learn about the nitty-gritty of writing and what makes writing good and the different techniques and stuff, it can be really anxiety-inducing because you want to hit all those marks and you don't want to mess up. But you have to remember that a lot of that can come through in revision. I'd say just cut loose a little bit. I understand the anxiety and you can let go of it for now. I'm telling you, you can let go and worry about it a little bit more later down the line. But also, if you've been working on these aspects of writing, they might show up subconsciously. Like you've probably already improved by practicing these things. Practicing show versus tell, learning to beef up your description. So it might be okay to let go and go with your instincts, because your instincts have probably shifted a little as well. Next one is from Verb. This is number 21. I have this thing where I can have a fun time planning out my story and get a vague idea of how I want it to end, but I can't figure out an antagonist or villain or anything for the protagonist to go against, which is weird because the entire story hinges on it. Still, I can't even figure it out, and I will end up changing it a million times. I will usually plan out scenes for along the way, some integral to the plot and some not. Even with that, I kind of flip a coin on the antagonist setup. Sorry if this one is weird, haha. I don't think this one is weird. I think it's very normal to have one element of the story you're struggling to come up with. I'm not quite sure how to help you on this one though. Yes, you do need some sort of conflict, but that doesn't necessarily translate into a direct antagonist. So you could have the character going up against like self-made obstacles, like a more abstract antagonist versus creating a villain. Maybe a villain isn't what the stories that you gravitate toward need. There are different types of conflict that you can introduce. Now that I think about it, I did struggle to come up with a compelling antagonist in my second young adult fantasy novel that I went on submission with a couple years ago, and am now reworking into an adult fantasy novel because it is a quest. Actually, my first two books were quests, but the first one had like baked in antagonists. If it's something like that where it's a quest and like the antagonist has to chase the protagonist and it's kind of like weird to come up with a reason for why they'd be doing that and come up with compelling moments where they actually like clash and stuff happens. In the end, I ended up having to beef up the antagonist's role, and that was by making him more of a compelling character. So if you're able to maybe find one of the concepts for an antagonist that you like and work on their character, that could also help. Maybe they just need to have a little bit more spice or meat to them. So I guess you could just sort of flip your mindset and start to think of an antagonist less as an antagonist and more as a character in their own right who is coming into conflict with the protagonist. Hopefully that helps. You can always send in a follow-up question if it's not helpful. Okay, this is number 22. This is from L. The fact that in my head the story is complete, but on paper it doesn't exist. I feel like I've been getting a couple along these lines, and really the advice that I can give at the end of the day is just write it. Just sit down and start to write. There really is nothing stopping you other than yourself, which I understand completely. It is very easy to get trapped in your own head when it comes to writing. But really, just, open up that Word document or Google Docs or whatever you need. Have fun with it. Get a mechanical keyboard if it helps. Sorry, mechanical keyboards are 100% on my brain because I saw Kelly get one in her most recent vlog and it just activated something in me and I feel so unhinged about it. Do whatever you need to do to make it fun, to make it a creative outlet, to make it not feel like scary or daunting or like you need to impress anyone or hit any milestone. Just start. Number 23, and this is going to be the last one. This is from Lou. My ADHD brain will always act out all the important scenes in my head before they are due, and then writing the rest of the plot between the scenes becomes unbearably boring, which holds me back from making progress. Okay, so you're seeing the scenes in your head before you actually write them down, and then the scenes that are not as interesting or fun are boring, and that holds you back from making progress. I would say, for me in this situation, as someone who also has ADHD, I would just write out the important scenes. I would try to control myself a little bit. I would write out one of the scenes that I'm excited for, one of the important scenes, or maybe two of them, and then write the transitional scenes between those before I allow myself to hit that next important or interesting scene. I'm actually trying to write this draft of Monts in a linear way, and the scenes that are not interesting they take a lot longer to write, but you just have to get through them because they are important. Another thing you could do is try to make those scenes more interesting. If there's an element that you typically enjoy writing, like a specific character relationship or banter or whatever, you can put a little bit more in that scene just to make it more fun to write, even if you end up editing it out. I totally get what you mean though. Sometimes scenes are just kind of boring to write and they're a chore and you have to get through them for the betterment of the book. But remember that if it's boring for you to write, it's probably boring for the reader to read. So there might be room for improvement there. Okay? Those are all the writing woes. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted. We are hitting the end of this batch, so I'll probably open up another form for these after the next podcast episode, which will be a guest episode. Thank you so much for watching the podcast and for coming along and listening to me rant about APHANTASIA. I really appreciate you guys for supporting me on this one, and if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like me to ramble about for our topic of the day, then please let me know. Oh, I have to start doing this now, but if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support me in any way, I am, about to go into grad school, so that's a little scary. Then I do have a Patreon, which I'll link below. Otherwise, no pressure whatsoever. Just having you guys watch these videos helps me immensely, and, I love y'all. Thank you so much. And that is a wrap on episode 3 of the Writing Retreat. We'll see you guys next time for a very special guest. Have a nice day. Bye.